completely nonsensical answer. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. So imagine you are standing in front of a massive ancient mural in a city square.
Okay.
And it is this incredibly intricate piece of art, like layers upon layers of paint depicting a society's entire history, right? The triumphs, the tragedies, the really complex struggles, the philosophers, the ordinary people, it's all there.
A full representation of life.
Exactly. It's beautiful, but it's also, messy. It's difficult to look at in places because it reflects the raw, sometimes ugly truth of human existence.
Right.
Now imagine a government crew rolls up with an industrial sandblaster.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they violently strip that complex mural down to the bare blank concrete. And then, right in the dead center, they paint a giant, perfectly round, cartoonish yellow smiley face.
That is quite the image.
And then they turn to you and ask, there, isn't that better? Isn't that so much simpler to understand?
I mean, it's a profound act of erasure, really.
Yeah.
It's masquerading as a public service, but you are replacing the nuanced, complicated reality of the human experience with a flat, easily digestible emotional symbol.
Yes. And that deeply unsettling feeling, that sudden realization that something fundamentally true has been paved over by something superficially easy, that is exactly what we are unpacking today.
It's a heavy topic.
It is. So welcome to this deep dive. Today, we are exploring the architecture of our own beliefs about artificial intelligence. But we are stepping entirely off the hype train for this one.
Definitely no hype today.
Right. We are not going to talk about stock prices or the latest app updates or whether a language model passed a bar exam. We are embarking on a really rigorous, step-by-step philosophical analysis of what our modern obsession with AI actually reveals about human nature itself. We're looking at a concept called AI as technological kitsch.
But before we dive into the actual mechanics of that argument, let's establish some clear ground rules for our discussion today.
Good idea.
Because the ideas we are unpacking today draw heavily on historical political ideologies, specifically Soviet propaganda during the Cold War, and they wade into some deeply polarized philosophical views of modern technology.
Right.
So let me make this explicitly clear to you, listening right now. In this deep dive, we do not take sides. We are not endorsing any specific political ideology, nor are we here to blindly condemn or praise the tech industry.
Exactly. No side taking.
Our purpose is purely to impartially map out and understand the fascinating, highly complex logic presented in our source material. We are here to ensure a balanced, objective representation of the historical and philosophical viewpoints discussed, just analyzing them on their own merits.
Consider us your impartial intellectual tour guides through some incredibly dense philosophical terrain. So grab a coffee, settle in, because we are setting the stage for a heavy but rewarding intellectual journey. By the time we finish this, the way you interpret the latest tech news and the way you think about humanity's relationship with machines is going to be completely reframed.
I completely agree.
So let's trace this back to its roots. To understand this critique of AI, we actually have to begin in 1968 in Czechoslovakia.
A very specific starting point.
Yeah, we have to start with a concept that emerged from a very dark, oppressive period of history.
Right. We need to look at the work of the Czech-born writer Milan Kundera, and specifically his 1980 novel, The Unbearable Lightness of Being.
Which is a classic.
It is, and Kundera's work is famously set against the backdrop of the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968. That was the event that violently crushed the period of political liberalization known as the Prague Spring.
Right, when they tried to open things up and the Soviets just rolled the tanks in.
Exactly. But the focus here isn't just on the military tanks rolling through the streets, it's on the insidious psychological and cultural warfare that followed the invasion. The Soviet secret police didn't just occupy physical space, they embedded themselves deeply into the social, intellectual, and cultural fabric of Prague.
They got into everyday life.
Yes. They engaged in relentless harassment of Czech writers, artists, and freethinkers.
And this harassment was so systematic and severe that it actually drove many of these intellectuals to suicide. Which is, that is horrific enough on its own. But the detail that truly sets up our entire philosophical framework today is what happened after these individuals died. It is how the state handled their memory, right?
This is where we see the concept of kitsch begin to form in a very specific political sense. These dead and discredited Prague intellectuals were subjected to a bizarre, posthumous disgrace.
Right.
Soviet Party members and officials would actually show up at the funerals of the very people they had driven to suicide.
Wait, they actually went to the funerals?
They did.
Yeah.
And they would deliver these highly formal, completely fabricated encomiums, basically, speeches of intense praise. The officials would publicly attest to the deceased's lifelong devotion to the state.
Oh my God.
The propaganda apparatus pivoted instantaneously, portraying the lives of these dissidents as noble sacrifices for the advancement of Soviet ideals.
I really want to pause on the psychology of that because it is incredibly twisted. The state takes people who had actively fought against the regime, people who explicitly despise the ideology, and they essentially hijack their corpses to say, look how much they loved us.
That's exactly what they did.
It goes right back to that sandblasted mural analogy. The Soviets weren't just eliminating the political opposition. They were sandblasting the complex reality of these people's lives, their struggles, their dissidents, their specific human friction, and painting over it with a one-dimensional, cartoonish state narrative.
It was a highly calculated move. The specific purpose of these fake encomiums was to purge Czechoslovakia of any deeper, profound, or contrary expressions of what a country, a people, or a life actually means.
Right. If you control the narrative, you control everything.
Yes. If you can rewrite the legacy of the most complex thinkers in a society, you are systematically erasing that society's shared history, its traditions, and its sense of what is genuinely valuable. Once the free thinkers were silenced and their legacies flattened into propaganda, the Soviets were free to impose their own worldview without any serious, organized intellectual opposition.
Which brings us to the word itself.
Right. Kundera needed a word to capture this specific type of suffocating, simplified culture that was being aggressively foisted upon the deceited Czech people. He used the word kitsch.
Now, hold on, because when you and I hear the word kitsch today, we usually think of, like, tacky velvet paintings of dogs playing poker.
Right, or cheap plastic flamingo lawn ornaments.
Exactly. It implies something harmlessly cheesy or in bad taste. But the original German definition of kitsch and how Kundera adapted it is much darker than that. It isn't about bad interior decorating. It is a philosophical weapon.
It is. While the original German word did refer broadly to exaggerated sentimentality and melodrama, the framework we are using today distills the term down to two essential active ingredients. And these two ingredients allow us to apply kitsch as a serious philosophical critique.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first ingredient is the aggressive simplification of complicated ideas. To be kitsch, there must be a simple, unbroken story to tell. All nuance, contradiction, and historical complexity must be erased.
So sandblasting the mural.
Exactly. And the second ingredient is that kitsch must offer easy, emotional solutions that sweep away the genuine questions and existential confusions people naturally have about the problems of life. It replaces serious, probing, difficult discussion with a comforting, sentimental absolute.
I mean, it is a psychological bypass mechanism. I want you, listening to this, to just think about how often you encounter this dynamic today. Think about incredibly complex global issues. Intractable conflicts, economic crises, sprawling social movement.
Things that take a long time to truly understand.
Right. But how often are they boiled down in your newsfeed to simple, emotional, good guy versus bad guy narratives? That impulse to sweep away the confusing, messy, gray areas of reality with a simple, emotional story that tells you exactly how to feel, that is the essence of kitsch.
It's very prevalent.
And the fascinating pivot we are making today is the argument that this isn't just a tactic of authoritarian regimes, it has mutated.
Which brings us to the application of this concept to modern technology. We are taking this historical, political definition of kitsch, a tool used to overwrite complex reality, and applying it directly to artificial intelligence, exploring the concept of technological kitsch.
Which sounds intense.
It is, but we have to make a very clear distinction here. Dreams of superintelligent computers are obviously not Soviet propaganda.
Right.
There is no secret police coercing us into buying a new smartphone or believing in the rise of the machines. The mechanism of delivery is entirely voluntary and market-driven.
Right. No one is holding a gun to our heads, forcing us to consume sci-fi narratives or download the latest generative AI app.
But the argument is that the effect of the AI worldview shares a fundamental similarity with that historical propaganda. It operates by replacing difficult, complex discussions about human nature, consciousness, and the purpose of society with one-dimensional technological stories.
It's replacing the hard stuff.
Exactly. Technological kitsch rewrites older, nuanced philosophical ideas with dangerously simple abstractions.
Let's ground this with a pop culture example that perfectly illustrates the point. Think about the 2015 sci-fi film Ex Machina.
Oh, great example.
Yeah, and specifically the character of Ava, the highly advanced, incredibly beautiful android played by Alicia Vikander. Ava represents the ultimate fantasy of utopian technological kitsch. The kitsch is this dreamy, captivating idea that one day an awe-inspiring machine with superintelligence is going to arrive and magically remake human existence.
And notice what that magical remaking actually entails. The underlying promise of this technological fantasy is that it will free us from all the old, exhausting human argument.
Right, we don't have to argue anymore.
The utopian AI narrative suggests an era thankfully free of debates about God, the nature of the mind, the limits of human freedom, and what actually constitutes the good life. The promise of technological kitsch is that beautiful machines or machines with beautiful, flawless intelligence will simply remove the hard facts and struggles of human existence.
It gives us a new, clean story.
Yes. A story that writes over the messy mural of our historical struggles, making them seem quaint and obsolete.
Okay, I have to challenge this premise for a second, just to play devil's advocate. Is it really fair to equate the pioneers of computer science with people deliberately trying to rewrite human purpose?
It's a fair question.
I mean, software engineers in Silicon Valley are just trying to build cool, efficient tools to solve problems, right? Are they really engaging in the same type of psychological erasure as a propaganda machine? It feels like we are applying a malicious intent to people who are just doing math and engineering.
It is a necessary pushback, but the argument does not hinge on the malicious intent of engineers. It isn't about them wanting to erase humanity. It hinges on a cascading philosophical mistake.
A mistake? Like what?
The framework traces this back to an intellectual genealogy, specifically what is termed the intelligence error, and begins with Alan Turing.
Okay, the father of modern computing.
Right. Now, Turing's monumental contributions to mathematics and the Allied war effort are undisputed. However, the philosophical critique argues that Turing inadvertently planted the seed for technological kitsch when he formulated his famous test for machine intelligence.
The Turing test.
Yes. He equated intelligence strictly with problem solving. He took a vast, mysterious human phenomenon and reduced it to a computable function.
But wait, didn't Turing have to do that just to get the science off the ground? You can't engineer a machine to have, like, existential dread or moral intuition. He needed a measurable metric, so he used problem solving. It was a practical boundary, not necessarily a philosophical declaration that humans are only problem solvers.
From an engineering standpoint, you are absolutely correct. He needed a metric to make it work. But the problem arose when that practical engineering boundary leaked out into the broader philosophical understanding of human nature.
Ah, it didn't stay in the lab.
Exactly. Once you publicly define intelligence as merely the capacity to solve logical puzzles, you have fundamentally altered the target. And this initial reduction was heavily compounded later by the mathematician Jack Good.
What did Jack Good do?
Good introduced the highly influential concept of ultra-intelligence. He proposed that the arrival of intelligent machines necessarily and logically implied the inevitable arrival of superintelligent machines.
How so?
His logic was that once a machine can solve problems better than a human, it can inevitably design a better machine than a human could, leading to an unstoppable intelligence explosion.
So Turing reduces intelligence to math, and Good says that because it's math, it will exponentially improve itself until it surpasses us completely. I see the trap. These were purely theoretical, mathematical definitions, but they escaped the laboratory.
They absolutely did.
Once the popular imagination accepted the premise that superintelligent machines were an inevitability based on those narrow parameters, we started rewriting human history and human meaning entirely within the parameters of computation. We started viewing ourselves through the lens of the machine.
And that shift in perspective forces society into two superficial extremes regarding the future. And both of these extremes are pure forms of technological kitsch, because they define the world's destiny only in terms of technology.
What are the extremes?
At one extreme, you have the apocalyptic campfire horror story, the narrative where the machines wake up, realize we are inefficient, and destroy us. Think Terminator.
Right.
At the other extreme, you have the dreamy, utopian narrative where the machines solve climate change, cure all diseases, and usher in an era of pure leisure.
The savior narrative.
Yes. Both extremes are kitsch because they rely on that exact same core simplification, that technology is the only active agent left in the human story.
They both sandblast the mural. Whether the new smiley face painted on the wall is a utopian robot servant or a dystopian robot overlord, it is still a cartoon replacing reality.
That's a great way to put it.
And to bring this back to Ex Machina, There is a specific piece of dialogue in that movie that perfectly captures this assumption. It's spoken by Nathan, the genius tech billionaire character who built the android. He justifies his reckless experiments by saying, "One day, the AIs are going to look back on us the same way we look at fossil skeletons on the plains of Africa. An upright ape living in dust with crude language and tools, all set for extinction."
That quote is the absolute apex of technological kitsch, and it demands fierce refutation.
Why?
The underlying assumption there is that computers will eventually possess the capacity to look back at all. But think about what the act of looking back actually requires.
Right.
It implies consciousness, self-reflection, a sense of historical continuity, and a subjective lived experience of time. None of those qualities are inherent in problem-solving computation, no matter how fast or complex the algorithm is.
And this is exactly how Kitsch operates as a bypass mechanism. This popular, almost casual assumption that machines will eventually just spontaneously inherit human consciousness and judge us actively prevents us from doing the hard philosophical work.
It stops us in our tracks.
To truly understand intelligence, we need to dive deep into the mysteries of existence, life, consciousness, and the actual biological differences between human minds and silicon computation. But Kitsch says, don't worry about those ancient, confusing questions. Just watch this cool sci-fi movie about a robot. It offers a cheap trope instead of a serious philosophical endeavor. We shouldn't let a simplistic narrative rob us of our complexity.
But if we want to understand why we are so incredibly susceptible to this specific brand of technological kitsch, we cannot just blame Alan Turing's definitions or modern Hollywood movies. Kitsch never exists in a vacuum.
Where does it come from, then?
It always takes root in a larger, pre-existing system of thought. For the Soviet propaganda Kundera analyzed, the underlying system was Marxist-Leninism. For our modern myth of inevitable AI, the underlying system is a worldview known as technoscience.
Technoscience.
Yes, and to truly unpack technoscience, we have to travel far back before the invention of the microchip. We have to go to the 19th century.
This is where the historical mechanics get really fascinating. We are trying to understand our obsession with artificial intelligence, and to do that, we have to talk about an eccentric 19th century French philosopher named Auguste Comte.
Yes, Auguste Comte is the thinker who first fully developed and articulated technoscience as a comprehensive, totalizing worldview.
He started sociology, right?
He did. He's widely recognized today as one of the founders of sociology. But more importantly for our analysis, he developed the grand theory of positivism.
What exactly is positivism?
Positivism is the radical philosophical view that only observable, scientific material phenomena truly exist and hold value. In Comte's positivist framework, the realms of religion, theology, and abstract traditional philosophy are not just incorrect, they are essentially imaginary.
Oh, wow.
They are viewed as primitive, flawed attempts by early humans to understand a natural world that only rigorous science can accurately describe and conquer.
And Comte didn't just casually suggest this, he built an entire evolutionary model around it. He proposed that the human mind and society as a whole progresses toward ultimate truth through three distinct, inevitable stages. I want to walk through these because it reveals exactly how this worldview operates.
It's crucial to understand his model.
Right. So the first stage he identified is the theological or religious stage. In this phase, humanity explains the mysteries of the natural world by attributing them to the will of gods or spirits.
Imagine early humanity experiencing a terrifying thunderstorm. In the theological stage, that storm is literally the anger of a deity, Thor throwing his hammer or Zeus hurling lightning bolts. The explanation relies entirely on supernatural agents.
Exactly. Then, Comte argues, society matures into the second stage, the philosophical or metaphysical stage. Here, humanity discards the specific gods, but still relies on invisible, abstract concepts to explain reality.
So it's a step away from literal gods.
Yeah. So the thunderstorm isn't Zeus anymore, but perhaps it is the manifestation of some abstract, vital force or natural law of balance in the universe. It is a transition away from deities, but it still relies on unseen, unprovable concepts.
Which leads to Comte's ultimate destination, the pinnacle of human evolution, the scientific or positive stage.
Stage 3.
Yes. In this final stage, humanity completely abandons the search for hidden meanings, abstract forces, or ultimate purposes. Instead, society focuses entirely on observing material facts and discovering the mathematical laws that govern them. The thunderstorm is no longer Zeus, and it is no longer an abstract vital force. It is simply the measurable friction of ice particles in a cumulonimbus cloud generating an electrical discharge.
And on the surface, that just sounds like the standard history of science. We figured out how weather works. But Comte took this significantly further.
Much further.
He didn't just see the scientific stage as a shift in academic methods. He saw it as a utopian trajectory for human salvation. He explicitly believed that this advanced technoscience would eventually create a literal heaven on earth. By understanding the true mathematical nature of all things, we could use that knowledge to engineer technologies that would make our lives vastly longer, infinitely better, and entirely rational. Science wasn't just a tool for observing the world, it was the sole mechanism for achieving human perfection.
He was incredibly uncompromising in this vision. He believed that the traditional institutions of society needed to reflect this absolute shift.
How so?
He proposed that the traditional church should be entirely dismantled and replaced by what he literally called a religion of humanity. This would be a thoroughly secular religion, completely devoid of any concept of God or the supernatural, grounded firmly and exclusively in the material sciences and observable reality. The scientists and engineers would be the new priesthood.
Let's use an analogy to really picture the scale of what Comte was demanding. Comte was essentially looking at a society filled with ancient, towering cathedrals, these massive structures built over centuries specifically for seeking spiritual wisdom, wrestling with moral ambiguity, and communing with the divine. And Comte was saying, tear every single one of them down, they're obsolete. Replace them entirely with laboratories and factories designed exclusively to conquer, measure, and manipulate material reality. He was declaring that we no longer need priests, ethicists, or philosophers. We only need engineers. But if you were a major, established thinker in the 19th century, and a sociologist suddenly declares that the entire history of human spiritual and philosophical striving is effectively a childish delusion, how do you react to that?
You react with profound, visceral rebellion. This leads to the fierce pushback against Comte's materialist juggernaut, driven by massive foundational figures in philosophy.
Who are we talking about here?
Two specific thinkers serve as primary examples of this rebellion: Friedrich Nietzsche and Fyodor Dostoevsky. These men recognized instantly that Comte wasn't just proposing a new method for conducting experiments, he was proposing a catastrophic reduction of what it actually meant to be a human being.
Let's start with Nietzsche. The argument is that Nietzsche looked at Comte's utopian technoscience and saw a worldview that severely constricted the very idea of a person.
Yes, Nietzsche saw the inherent, fatal limitation in the positivist promise. He understood that technoscience might indeed succeed in helping us live longer, more comfortable lives through better medicine and more efficient engineering. But he realized it is fundamentally incapable of making us wiser or deeper.
It can't give us meaning.
Exactly. Nietzsche argued that the traditional idea of a hero, a person possessing extraordinary, hard-won gifts, deep moral virtues, and profound spiritual depth, simply had no place in Comte's vision. Comte's technoscience had essentially replaced any traditional discussion of character, virtue, and interpersonhood with a relentless, mechanical obsession with the progress of technology.
The machine becomes the focus, not the soul.
Precisely. In a purely positivist, materialist world, a hero isn't someone who conquers their own inner demons to achieve greatness of soul. A hero is just someone who invents a slightly more efficient steam engine. The human spirit is flattened into mere utility.
It takes all the poetry out of existence. And if Nietzsche was lamenting this flattening of the human experience, Dostoevsky was absolutely raging against it. We have to look at Dostoevsky's famous novella, Notes from Underground. In it, Dostoevsky protests contemptuously against what he saw as the rapidly growing scourge of scientism.
And we should define scientism carefully here. Scientism is not the practice of science. It is the absolute, dogmatic belief that scientific knowledge is the only real, valid form of knowledge in existence.
Right. It's science as a religion.
Yes. Dostoevsky's prose in Notes from Underground reflects a deep skepticism and a very real existential terror regarding the dominance of this technoscientific thinking. He argued fiercely for the absolute necessity of human irrationality.
Irrationality.
Yes, he wrote famously that one's own free and unfettered volition, one's own caprice, however wild one's own fancy, inflamed sometimes to the point of madness, that is the one best and greatest good.
Okay, I struggle with this a bit. I understand rebelling against a sterile laboratory, but why is madness and caprice the greatest good? Is Dostoevsky seriously arguing that we should act crazy and make irrational choices just to spite a scientific spreadsheet? That seems like a terrible way to run a society.
It sounds chaotic, but you have to understand the specific mechanism of his argument. He isn't advocating for chaos just for the sake of chaos. He argues that wild, unfettered caprice is the greatest good specifically because it is the one element of the human experience that fundamentally cannot fit into any scientific classification or mathematical formula.
It breaks the model.
Exactly. Human unpredictability is the ghost in the machine that completely breaks the positivist model. Think about it. If human beings are completely rational and entirely material, then science can categorize us, predict us, and ultimately control us completely. We just become inputs in an equation.
We become predictable.
Yes. Dostoevsky is arguing that our wild, unpredictable volition, our ability to make a choice that defies logical utility simply because we want to, is the ultimate proof of our soul. Ignoring that irrational reality is an omission that, as he puts it, sends all systems and theories to the devil.
He is saying the spreadsheet is a cage, and irrationality is the only way to prove you are still free. That is a brilliant synthesis. The core debate here is that Dostoevsky, Nietzsche, and traditional philosophers were constantly pointing toward the ideal of a full, complex, often contradictory person.
Right.
But Comte was pointing toward an ideal that was entirely external to us, the relentless mechanical advance of technoscience itself. The fundamental problem, which Comte likely fully understood, was that his vision of a techno-scientific future was simultaneously a radical, iconoclastic statement about human nature.
Precisely. By championing technoscience as the ultimate exclusive truth, Comte was implicitly arguing that all traditional views of humanity were entirely irrelevant. Whether you believed humans were uniquely created by God with a divine spark, or if you took the ancient Greek view that humans were rational creatures meant to be seekers of profound wisdom, Comte was saying all of that is garbage.
That doesn't matter anymore.
Right. We don't need a soul or philosophical wisdom if we have a highly efficient factory. This analysis validates the thinkers who refuse to be taken in by the juggernaut of technoscience. It acknowledges they were right to sound the alarm about what we were trading away.
And this philosophical battle didn't just quietly fade away in the 19th century. We have to follow the causality here. This pushback bridges directly to a chilling conclusion in the 20th century. To understand how Comte's ideas ultimately manifested, we have to look at the philosopher Hannah Arendt.
Hannah Arendt is a towering figure in 20th century philosophy. She is perhaps most famous for coining the phrase the banality of evil during her coverage of the Nazi Nuremberg trials,
Right.
which immediately establishes her immense philosophical weight and her profound understanding of how systemic, normalized horrors occur when humans are reduced to mere cogs in a machine. Arendt looked back at the trajectory of the 20th century and concluded that Comte had essentially won.
Technoscience won.
Yes, technoscience had triumphed as the dominant global paradigm. But she argued that this triumph amounted to nothing less than a complete, fundamental redefinition of human nature itself. We didn't just invent new tools, we changed our core identity.
The way she explains this through a linguistic shift is one of the most profound parts of this entire analysis. She meticulously breaks down a change in classical terminology to show exactly what we lost. She points to the classical ancient Greek understanding of humans as Homo sapiens.
Homo sapiens.
Translated literally, this means wise man. Under this historical, thousands of years old understanding, human focus and human value were centered on wisdom and the pursuit of deep knowledge.
And that wisdom involved two very specific Greek concepts. The first is episteme, which is the deep, contemplative knowledge of natural phenomena, basically, understanding the universe.
Okay, episteme.
The second, and crucially more important concept, is sapientiae, which is wisdom relating to human values, morality, ethics, and how to structure a just society.
So a Homo sapiens is a creature whose highest, most noble purpose is to deeply understand the world and figure out how to live a good, moral, and meaningful life within it. But Arendt argued that by fully embracing Comte's technoscience as our absolute worldview, we willingly threw Homo sapiens in the trash. We redefined ourselves as Homo faber.
Homo faber translates to man the builder, or man the maker. In this new definition, society operates on the belief that techne, which is the practical knowledge of craft, the knowledge of how to build and manipulate things, which is the very root of the word technology, is the absolute sole factor that defines human worth.
I want to spend some real time unpacking what living as Homo faber actually looks like because it is everywhere today. It isn't just about building bridges or writing code, it is how we view ourselves.
It's ingrained in us.
Think about the modern hustle culture, where your entire value as a human being is tied to your daily productivity output. Or think about the biohacking movement, where people treat their own biological bodies as inefficient hardware that needs to be optimized with supplements, precise sleep tracking, and data analytics just to squeeze out a little more daily performance. We are treating ourselves as machines to be engineered rather than as souls to be nurtured. We have internalized technique completely.
That is the perfect modern manifestation of Homo faber. We measure our own lives by the metrics of machines: efficiency, output, and optimization. And this leads to a staggering logical conclusion regarding artificial intelligence.
What's the conclusion?
The grand project of building AI, which is essentially the project of building a better version of ourselves in silicon, would literally not make logical sense if our traditional notions of humanity had remained intact.
Explain that.
If we still genuinely valued sapiency, moral wisdom, and ethical depth above all else, we would not be recklessly racing to build machines that can merely outcompute us. We would be focused on how to live better, not just how to calculate faster. We had to systematically reduce our own worth. We had to downgrade our identity from wisdom seekers to mere tool builders in order to elevate the wonders of our technology to the level of the divine.
Wow. That is a devastating realization. We
Yeah.
hollowed ourselves out so the machines would look more impressive. Aren't warned that this seismic shift from wisdom to technology guaranteed two highly dangerous outcomes. First, that technological development would continue completely unbridled, entirely divorced from moral restraint or ethical consideration, because technique does not inherently contain morality. It only contains utility.
Right, just builds.
And second, that increasingly we would view our technological successes as the only meaningful statements about our civilization. We measure human progress by the speed of our microchips and the size of our language models, entirely ignoring the depth of our societal compassion or the wisdom of our leaders.
To contextualize how deeply embedded this idea became, we can look at John von Neumann, the legendary mathematician and pioneer of early computing. Von Neumann is famous for making early, somewhat cryptic comments about the approach of a technological singularity.
It's a singularity.
Yes, a hypothetical future point where technological advances accelerate so rapidly that they exceed human comprehension or control.
He was basically predicting the intelligence explosion long before it was a popular sci-fi trope.
Yes, and while von Neumann approached this purely from a mathematical and scientific perspective, his scientific prediction perfectly mirrors Hannah Arendt's philosophical warning. Placing techne, the pure act of building and manipulating, at the dead center of our worldview makes it entirely logically consistent to view a human person merely as something that can be built, modified, or eventually replaced.
Because that's all we are now.
If there is fundamentally nothing more to a person than the capacity to construct advanced technologies and process data, then a person is nothing more than a biological machine.
And if we are just biological machines, we aren't even that special. As the analysis points out, bees are builders. They build incredibly complex hives. Beavers build dams. If the act of building is the only thing that defines our worth, we are just another animal acting on instinct.
Exactly.
And once we embark down that philosophical route, it is a very short, inevitable journey to artificial intelligence. It ties right back to Alan Turing's initial intelligence error of equating mind with math. The ultimate tragic triumph of Homo faber as a species is to finally build a mechanical version of itself that builds things better than it can. That is the professed open goal of AI development.
To outbuild the builder.
But truly exploring whether that project can actually succeed, whether a machine can actually possess a mind, forces us back into those deep, terrifying waters of understanding human nature, and that is exactly what technological kitsch is designed to help us avoid.
Having established that modern society has fundamentally embraced this identity of Homo faber, we have to examine how this assumption actually plays out in the physical world. If we are operating under the umbrella of technoscience, we must ask a critical question. Do the fields of science and technology actually behave in the same way?
And the answer is no, right?
The answer is crucially, fundamentally, no.
Right, because since Auguste Comte, we have been throwing the word technoscience around, combining the two words as if they are one unified, monolithic force marching toward the future. But there is a massive distinction between the historical progression of scientific knowledge and the progression of technological innovation. They are completely different beasts with different trajectories.
Let's begin by examining science. The framework uses an excellent metaphor to describe scientific progression: a jigsaw puzzle. Think about how scientific knowledge has historically advanced. It began in earnest with the scientific revolution, and over a few hundred years, much of the foundational modern scientific theory was firmly put into place.
The big puzzle pieces.
Right. We have major paradigm-defining examples: Newton's laws of classical physics, Maxwell's equations of electrodynamics, Carnot's fundamental theories of thermodynamics, and Darwin's theory of biological evolution.
And as these massive foundational theories were tested, peer-reviewed, and proven, they locked together. The analysis acknowledges that there are rare, major paradigm shifts like quantum theory and general relativity in the 20th century completely upending classical physics, but generally these discoveries fit together to form a unified, coherent picture of the physical universe.
Exactly. And the critical defining insight here is the mechanism of how this works. As scientific knowledge advances, the range of future possibilities actually shrinks.
It shrinks.
Yes. Just like working on a physical jigsaw puzzle, with each piece of absolute truth that is securely fitted into place, the remaining choices and unknown spaces are limited. Science is ultimately a process of narrowing down reality to its fundamental, unbreakable laws. Eventually, the borders are defined, the major sections are filled in, and the picture is mostly complete.
We figure out gravity, and gravity stays figured out. But technology behaves in the exact opposite way. It is not a jigsaw puzzle where the picture becomes clearer and the options become fewer. Technology is an explosion.
An explosion.
The futurist Ray Kurzweil is frequently cited to explain this phenomenon. Technological innovation accelerates exponentially. When you invent a new technology, it doesn't limit what can follow it. It does the exact opposite. It shatters boundaries and makes vastly more previously unimaginable inventions possible.
Technology does not settle into a finished, static picture. It evolves and accretes. We pile technological developments one on top of the other endlessly. And this evolutionary acceleration means the time gap between major, world-altering innovations is constantly shrinking.
It's getting faster.
Consider a historical comparison. Look at the massive expanse of time, centuries, between the invention of the printing press and the arrival of the first rudimentary computer. Now compare that to the incredibly short gap, mere decades, between the invention of the computer and the creation of the global internet.
The pace is blinding. So we have science, which by its nature is a process of settling, defining, and narrowing reality down to facts. And we have technology, which is a process of exploding, compounding, and constantly inventing new realities. Therefore, the very term technoscience is complicated and in many ways an oxymoron.
It really is.
It attempts to force two fundamentally different patterns of human endeavor into a single, neat template.
Which brings us to the final synthesizing argument regarding artificial intelligence. Because the underlying nature of science, which governs human biology and natural consciousness, and the nature of technology, which governs computing, behave so fundamentally differently, we cannot lazily automatically assume that human intelligence and machine intelligence are destined to be alike.
We can't just mash them together.
We simply do not know yet if they are more alike than unalike.
So how do we pull all these threads together? What does this mean for us today? It means that the question of AI cannot be solved by simply waiting for the next software update or the next generation of microchips. The arrival of AI must be treated as an invitation to struggle with profound philosophical conundrums.
It's a mirror.
Yes, it is a mirror forcing us to look at the reality of human nature, consciousness, and the soul. We cannot use the myth of inevitable utopian AI as a piece of technological kitsch, a cheap, emotional excuse to ignore the hard questions about existence, morality, and what makes us uniquely human. Technoscience, when it is taken as a complete, absolute statement about who we are, is ultimately a terrible simplification.
It is the ultimate intrusion of kitsch into the deepest, most difficult issues of life. It attempts to take the profound, messy, beautiful mystery of the human soul and replace it with the predictable, computable, sterile algorithm.
And that brings this entire intellectual journey directly back to you listening right now. We've covered a massive amount of historical and philosophical ground today. We started with the oppressive propaganda of Soviet Prague, walked through the radical positivism of 19th century French philosophy, engaged with the fierce rebellion of Nietzsche and Dostoevsky, and ended up analyzing the modern server farms and utopian promises of Silicon Valley.
We've been everywhere.
But the core question driving all of this is entirely personal. How do you consume the narratives around artificial intelligence in your daily life? When you read the latest headline about a new AI model achieving some new benchmark, Are you engaging with the complex reality of human existence?
Mhm.
Or are you, even passively, falling for technological kitsch?
Are you accepting the smiley face?
Exactly. Are you accepting a simplified, emotional story that conveniently sweeps away the need for actual, hard-won human wisdom?
To build on that reflection, we are left with an underlying framework that provokes a deeply unsettling question for the future. If our society has truly followed Auguste Comte's vision, if we have completely and irrevocably redefined human nature as homo faber, meaning our entire identity, our cultural value, and our ultimate worth is based solely on our ability to build complex tools and optimize our output, what happens to the human soul on the day we finally succeed in building a machine that is a better builder than we are?
It is the ultimate existential cliffhanger. If we have decided we are only builders, and the act of building is permanently, vastly surpassed and taken from us by an ultra-intelligent machine, what is left of us? Are we just that blank, sandblasted concrete wall? It makes you wonder if that cartoonish yellow smiley face of technological kitsch isn't just a simple story we tell ourselves to feel better, but a mask we are desperately wearing to hide the fact that we've completely forgotten how to paint the complex mural of a meaningful human life. Thank you for joining us on this intensely philosophical deep dive. Keep questioning the easy narratives, keep demanding the complex truths,